Hey everyone, and welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat.
It's great to be here.
Today we're going deep on staff training.
Yes!
Specifically for ABA.
Right.
It's so important to make sure our teams have the skills to give the best support to our clients.
Absolutely. We're using Chapter 4 of the Supervisor's Guidebook for this deep dive.
Perfect.
So let's get right to it.
Awesome. So one of the things that I think is a challenge in human services is that sometimes you get new hires that don't have specific training in what they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So they might know ABA,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to apply it.
Right. That's one of the biggest challenges that we see in human services is that new hires come in, they don't necessarily have the specific training that they need for the work that they're going to be doing.
Yeah, and orientation is great,
Yes.
for getting like the agency procedures down.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily translate to, how to support a client with specific needs.
Exactly. Orientation is really good for that kind of like general agency stuff,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really get to those nitty-gritty skills that you need to actually support a client.
Right. So it seems like we need to go beyond just giving information.
Yes.
We need to make sure that staff can actually like perform the skills.
Absolutely. It's really the difference between, verbally being able to describe what a reinforcement is and actually being able to use one.
Right.
So that's where this idea of competency-based training comes in. And it's really not enough to just, provide the information and have staff be able to talk about it. They need to actually show us that they can do it.
Right. So how do we get to that point?
Well, one of the ways that we can ensure that our staff are competent is to use something called behavioral skills training.
Okay.
Or BST. And this is a really well-researched, evidence-based protocol for training staff.
Okay, BST. I'm ready. What are the steps?
All right. So the first step is that we have to describe the skill. And this is where we break down the task into those very specific, observable behaviors. We're not just saying like, hey, go implement a token economy.
Right.
But instead, we're going to break it down into, how do you choose tokens?
Right.
How do you deliver tokens?
Okay.
What are the behaviors that are targeted? Really thinking about those very specific steps. And for complex skills, using a performance checklist can be really helpful.
Like that. Kind of like a roadmap for that skill.
Exactly. Exactly. And then once we've described the skill, we're going to provide staff with a written description of that skill.
Okay.
And this serves as what we call a job aid. So it's something that staff can refer back to, kind of like a cheat sheet.
I like that.
Yeah.
Especially for like if you forget.
Exactly.
Then you've got something to reference.
You got it. And this is especially important, for tasks that maybe weren't developed by the supervisor. So, if a clinician developed a specific task, having a concise summary is going to be really helpful for the supervisor to be able to train it.
Okay, so we've got our description.
Yes.
We've got our summary. What's next?
All right, so then we need to show them how to do it.
Okay.
So this is where the demonstration comes in.
Got it.
And this is where the supervisor is going to model the skill. And it's really important that the supervisor is competent in the skill because they're not going to be able to train it effectively if they don't know how to do it.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So this can also look like role-playing.
Okay.
Where the supervisor acts as, maybe the client and the staff acts as the staff member.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. And then once the staff has seen that demonstration, it's their turn to try it.
Okay.
So this is step 4 where they practice the skill, and this is done immediately after the demonstration.
Okay.
And when they're practicing, the supervisor is going to be providing feedback,
Okay.
letting them know what they did well, letting them know areas to improve on.
So it's practice with feedback.
Exactly. Exactly. And then step 5 is, what if they don't get it right away?
Right.
Well, then we just keep practicing until they get it right. So we're going to repeat that practice with feedback until that staff member can perform the skill correctly.
Okay.
And not just correctly in the training setting, but also correctly in the work setting.
Right. So we really want to see that mastery.
Exactly.
Not just like a surface level understanding.
Absolutely.
This is great. So it seems like there's a lot of different ways that we could give this training.
Yeah.
Like, what are the options?
So the 2 main formats that are discussed in the chapter are group training and individual training.
Okay.
And I think we should start by talking about group training because a lot of times if there are multiple staff that need the same training, it can be more efficient to train everybody together.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. But I think it's important to note that group training does come with its own challenges.
Okay. What kind of challenges?
Well, one of the things is that it requires that the trainer is very prepared.
Okay.
So, knowing the material really well is super important.
Right.
But also having those written summaries that we talked about, practicing the demonstration.
Okay.
all of that is super important because if you're fumbling around during the training, it's not going to be as effective.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then, we also want to think about how to keep our trainees engaged.
Yeah. Because training can get boring.
Oh, it definitely can.
Like we've all been to those trainings that are just like lecture, 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 and you zone out.
Yeah, absolutely. So finding that balance between trainer talk and trainee activity is really important.
So how do we make group training more interactive?
Well, one of the things is, don't be afraid to bring in other experts.
Okay.
So if there's a clinician that developed a specific program that you're training,
Right.
bringing them in is a really good way to make that training more interactive and also helps to establish that, they were involved in the process.
Right. Okay. I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think one other thing to keep in mind about group training is that, that's really just the first step.
Okay.
You're going to have to observe for competency on the job, too.
Right. You want to make sure that it translates
Absolutely.
to the real world.
Exactly.
So what about individual training? When would we do that?
So individual training is often more appropriate when we need to train someone quickly.
Okay.
So maybe it's a new hire, or maybe it's somebody who is taking on a temporary assignment.
Okay.
And it's usually a little bit more informal and can often be done in the work setting.
Okay.
And so, those demonstration and practice steps, they still occur, but they may look a little bit different.
Right.
So maybe the supervisor models the skill with the staff playing the role of the client.
Yeah, okay.
And then they switch roles.
I like that.
Yeah, it's really just about being flexible and adapting to the needs of the learner.
Okay, great. So I know that we're all busy.
Yes.
We're all, pressed for time, and training takes time.
It does.
So how do we make training more efficient?
Well, one of the things is to ensure staff demonstrate competence during the role play.
Okay.
Because if we can get them to competency during that training, then we're reducing the amount of time that we have to spend training on the job later.
So it's almost like the role play becomes like an assessment too.
Exactly. So really investing that time up front in making sure they're competent can save you a lot of time on the back end.
Okay. I like that.
Another thing that you can do is incorporate media-based training.
Okay.
So things like videos or online modules
Okay.
can be really helpful. And then, we can use that media-based training for those components that are really heavy on information.
Right.
And that frees up our time to actually be able to do those demonstrations in that practice.
Right. Okay. So we can use media for kind of the basics.
Yeah, exactly.
And then get into the nitty-gritty with the hands-on stuff.
Exactly.
And then I think the last strategy that we talked about was pyramidal training.
Yes.
So can you just refresh my memory on that?
Yeah. So pyramidal training is essentially where you train a small group of staff.
Right.
And then those staff go on to train other staff. So it's kind of like this cascade effect.
Oh, wow.
So, as the supervisor, you might train, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 staff, and then those staff go on and train, the rest of the team.
Okay, so that could really help with the workload of the supervisor.
It definitely can.
And then do those other staff, they don't have to be supervisors.
They don't have to be supervisors. They can just be, experienced staff that are competent in the skills that they're training.
Okay, so are there any downsides to that?
Well, one of the things is that it does increase the workload for those peer trainers.
Right.
And not everybody is comfortable training their peers.
Right. Yeah.
So making sure that you're choosing the right people for that role.
Right.
And that you're giving them the support that they need to be successful is really important.
Okay.
But I think if done well, pyramidal training can be really effective.
So we talked a lot about like the logistics of training.
Yes.
But how do we ensure that staff are going to be receptive to it?
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about, things like role playing.
Yeah.
Which can be kind of awkward.
Absolutely. And, I think, thankfully, BST is generally pretty well received by staff.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's effective.
Okay.
So when staff see that it works and that their supervisor is invested in making sure that they're competent,
right,
they tend to be more receptive to the process.
So it's like creating that culture of like training is important.
Exactly.
Valuable.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, we can go a step further than that by providing a rationale for the training.
Okay.
So, staff are going to be more likely to buy into the training if they understand why they're learning a particular skill.
Okay.
And how it's going to help them in their work.
Right. So kind of tying it back to like the real world.
Exactly. And then, when the supervisor actually demonstrates those skills themselves,
right,
it shows the staff that, they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk.
Right. Like leading by example.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
And, another important thing to keep in mind is that training isn't always the answer.
Okay.
So before you go launching into this big training program,
Right.
you really need to determine if the issue is truly a lack of knowledge or skill.
Because it could be something else.
It could be something else.
Like maybe the environment's not good.
Exactly.
Or they're just not motivated.
Or they don't have the resources.
Right.
Yeah. So really, before we jump into any solution, we need to identify what the root of the problem is.
This is awesome. I feel like I'm already getting like a lot of great information about how to approach staff training.
Awesome.
So thank you for all these insights so far.
You're welcome.
We've got lots more to come.
We do. So we were talking about how important it is to make sure that the training that we're providing is actually translating into staff being able to implement those skills in the real world.
Right. And that's what's going to benefit our clients the most.
Absolutely. So to that end, one of the things that we need to think about is how do we make training engaging?
Right. Because if it's not engaging, people are going to pay attention.
Exactly. And they're not going to retain the information.
And you mentioned media.
Yeah. So using things like videos and online modules can be a really great way to make training more engaging, and also it's really efficient.
Okay.
So, instead of having to stand up there and lecture about a specific concept, you can show a short engaging video and then follow that up with, maybe a discussion or an activity.
You're like a role play.
Exactly.
I like that.
So it's kind of giving them, both that information, but also that opportunity to practice.
Right, and kind of see it in action.
Exactly. And speaking of seeing things in action, I'm also a big fan of peer-to-peer mentoring.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Just having that opportunity for newer staff to kind of get that support from somebody who's been in the field longer.
Yeah, like you have a buddy to walk you through it.
Exactly. And, that mentor can provide guidance. They can share their experiences.
Right.
They can even provide feedback in the moment.
Right. And it kind of creates like a nice work environment.
Absolutely. It fosters teamwork and collaboration.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is so important, in any setting, but especially in a field that can be as demanding as ours.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about like the good stuff.
Yeah.
But what about like what happens when training isn't the answer?
Right. So, we've talked a lot about, how effective training can be.
Right.
When, we're looking at skill deficits.
Right.
But sometimes, there's a performance issue that's not related to skills.
Right.
It could be something else.
Yeah, like maybe their motivation's low.
Right. Or maybe the environment is not conducive to them being able to perform the skills.
Or maybe something's going on personally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So training is not going to be the answer in those situations.
Right. You're trying to fix something that's not broken.
Exactly. So before we jump into, creating this big training program, we need to take a step back and figure out what the problem is.
So how do we do that?
Well, I think the first thing is, really gather data.
Yeah.
So, observe the staff member's performance.
Right.
Review any work samples that they have.
Okay.
And really importantly, talk to them.
Right.
Find out from them what they're struggling with.
Yeah, what their perspective is.
Exactly. And, what supports they might need to be successful.
And create that environment where they feel comfortable sharing that information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And once we kind of have a clearer picture of what's going on, then we can figure out what the best course of action is.
Right. And it might be training.
It might be training.
But it might be something else.
Right. It might be, providing additional support.
Right.
Maybe adjusting their workload.
Yeah.
Maybe even connecting them with resources outside of work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, we need to remember that our staff are people, they have lives outside of work.
Right.
And sometimes those things, creep in
and
affect their performance.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
So we talked about like the hard stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there's something that also gets forgotten a lot.
Yeah.
Which is appreciation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It is so important to make sure that we are recognizing our staff for their hard work.
And it makes such a big difference.
It really does.
When people feel appreciated,
absolutely,
they're going to work harder.
Yeah.
They're going to be happier.
And that's going to ultimately benefit the clients.
Right.
So we really need to be making an effort to celebrate the successes.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be something big. It could be a small token.
It could be a verbal praise.
Right. Just saying thank you.
Exactly. Just acknowledging, the hard work that they're putting in.
This is great. I already have so many ideas.
I'm so glad.
Of how I can make some changes with my team.
Awesome. And, we're going to talk about even more stuff in the next part.
What do you have for me?
All All right, so one of the things that's becoming really popular is using gamification for training.
Gamification.
Yeah, so essentially this is just taking those elements of game design,
Okay.
like points and badges and leaderboards and challenges, and incorporating those into training.
So making it fun.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah, it really, taps into that kind of natural desire that we have for, competition and achievement,
Right.
and can make learning a lot more fun and engaging.
So for staff that are really motivated by that,
Yeah.
like I could see that being really helpful.
Absolutely. And it also, helps with retention.
Okay.
When things are more fun, you're more likely to remember them.
Right.
So not just about the entertainment value.
Okay. What else do you have?
Another thing that, is starting to be used more and more is virtual reality simulation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is really cool.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah, it's pretty cutting edge.
Okay. Tell me more.
So, essentially you can put on a VR headset
Okay.
and be put into a simulated environment.
Wow.
And so you can practice your skills
Okay.
with virtual clients.
That's amazing.
It's really cool. So it gives staff that opportunity to, make mistakes.
It's safe space.
Yeah. In a safe space and learn from them.
Yeah. And like you don't have the pressure of like a real person there.
Exactly. So, you can practice things like de-escalation techniques.
Wow.
Implementing behavior plans, troubleshooting challenging situations.
Okay. This is great.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see where this technology goes in the future.
Yeah, me too.
And then, beyond those specific methods,
Yeah.
I think it's really important to just make sure that you're creating a culture of continuous learning in your organization.
Yeah. How do we do that?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing that learning isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process.
So it's not just about those initial trainings.
Exactly. It's about, providing ongoing opportunities for staff to learn and grow.
So like going to conferences.
Yes. Going to conferences, workshops, webinars,
Okay.
Creating mentorship programs, peer-to-peer learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as setting aside time each week for staff to, share articles or research.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah, it's really just about making learning a part of your culture.
Oh.
And I think if you can do that, you're going to be well on your way to having a really successful training program.
This has been so great.
Yeah.
I'm excited to take some of this back to my organization.
Awesome.
And really start to make some changes.
Yeah, I think, staff training is something that we should be talking about more.
Yes.
And something that, we should be constantly striving to improve.
Yeah. And the better our training programs are, the better the services are going to be for our clients.
Exactly.
So this has been so helpful.
I'm glad.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure being here.
And for joining us for this deep dive into staff training.
Yes.
Be sure to check out ABA Chapter Chat for more deep dives into the world of ABA.
And keep those brains buzzing.
Until next time.